There comes a time in everyone's life where you feel kind of hopeless, lost. That's probably how Glenn Schofield felt when making the Callisto protocol. I guess it's like Sam Witwer says, there's always a price to pay. And that price was Glenn Schofield's paycheck from Crafton. In all seriousness, I actually enjoyed the Callisto protocol for the most part. Sure, it's got its quirks, but it's not the worst thing ever made. It is ironic that all the different media outlets kept saying this was going to be the next Dead Space, given that it was made basically by the original team, Glenn Schofield being the creative director of this as well as the original Dead Space.
Hi, I'm Glenn Schofield, creator and director of Dead Space. I set out to make the scariest game of all time. Along the way, I had to break some rules, make some new ones, and really redefine how I make video games.
But what ended up being the next Dead Space was actually Dead Space. Callisto Protocol does have a bit of a history. Glenn Schofield, being the creative director and producer of the original Dead Space, pitched a game called Rancid Moon.
Started with Glenn Schofield, the EP. He had a vision for a game that he was all excited about. And he wanted to do a prison game in space, and I think he wanted to even call it, Moon Wars or something.
No, it wasn't called Moon Wars. It was, Rancid Moon, that's right, yes. It was sort of like Escape from New York on another planet.
That game was rejected.
And we were like, okay, we got the space part, we're down with that. I'm not so sure about the prisoner part.
And what we got was Dead Space after a System Shock reboot and everything else. So years later, when the opportunity comes up for Glenn Schofield to make Rancid Moon, finally his dream game, so to speak, we get the Callisto Protocol, which is why it looks similar to Dead Space, kind of sounds like Dead Space. Has a similar setup and concept to Dead Space.
Authorized for re-entry.
Sorry, but I got no choice! Open it hot! Who's the anti-grav? Already at maximum! We're not gonna make it! Yes, we are! Watch out! Brace for impact!
And visually, did I say looks like Dead Space? Which is where the whole Dead Space tie-in successor comes in, despite not actually being Dead Space. That's a whole lot of Dead Space. Fuck. We'll get into the story in a minute, but the thing that was really driving the Callisto Protocol's marketing, a part of it anyway, was ray tracing, which I don't have a card to show off, the visuals. Visually, Callisto Protocol is right on the money. This game is in some ways the gold standard for how other games should look. The actors look like themselves in real life. Compared side by side, real life photos, Callisto Protocol models, they are the actors. We finally reached that point where Final Fantasy The Spirits Within, CG movies, the cartoon Pixar stuff is real and we can play it. We are at that visual threshold with very diminishing returns. Sure, it's uncanny valley levels of realism here and there. Your brain still processes that, oh, this is a video game that I'm playing, but it has these actors in it. It's very strange, but you can't say that this isn't beautiful. Stunning. And the same goes for the locations. Walking through snow is great, and it totally brought back that Dead Space 3 walking through the snow feeling. I really felt like I was in a snowy, cold area, especially when I had my air conditioning on to like 67 and my fan was on. It was cold, so I was cold, totally immersed. Exploring the much too long sewer level also looks and feels really good, despite it's a sewer level, and it gives up the right amount of creepiness. Now, this game is a sort of survival horror in that it's got most limited resources ever on the planet, but we'll get to that in a second. And even though this game isn't very scary, it does have some tense moments, and it did scare me because I just don't really play horror games that much. It is very creepy. It pulls it off. Visually, audio, sound, everything, it works. It works perfectly. It's just a shame that everything else kind of falls flat. And kind of is the key phrase here. The combat kind of sucks. The dodge mechanic is weird in that it's not timed at all. There's nothing special you have to do. You just hold left or right down on the joystick or press A or D on your keyboard and you'll dodge automatically. Nothing timed, you just gotta hold it. It looks good and it feels good. It's just kind of weird, which makes it kind of sucky. And speaking of the melee combat, it's time to talk about Legacy of Kain, baby.
We are merely passengers on the wheel of destiny, describing a perfect circle to this point. I've seen the beginning and the end of our story, however, and the tale is crude and ill-conceived. We must rewrite the ending of it. You and I.
Legacy of Kain. So there's a lot to say about Blood Omen 2, but we'll get to that in another video. Definitely Legacy of Kain is my favorite thing, blah, blah, blah. So it makes sense he'd recycle the combat here when making basically a beat 'em up game in Callisto Protocol. And it's ruined, kind of, there's that word again, by having guns. Now I know what you're thinking, but guns are good. Calypso. Guns will surely make Callisto a good game. Guns are practically useless on harder difficulties. This game is a melee focused combat game. Guns are a second thought. Ammo is incredibly scarce and the enemies are so spongy it almost makes me wonder why they even added them in the first place. Oh wait! Dead Space. It comes back to Dead Space as well. You have your pistol and a shotgun, and then other guns that are just totally useless. Like your guns are basic, okay? For a crazy distant sci-fi future, it's basic. However, it is cool. There is a 3D printing upgrade station, which is awesome. It just takes forever. Your resources are so scarce. It's almost, why even bother playing on harder difficulties if you can't upgrade and feel like a god towards the end of the game? And that's a huge flaw with Callisto Protocol, is that it doesn't do your basic horror game trope in that you start off weak and powerless and then by the end you're a super powered god killing monster slaying machine. All that is out the window, especially if you're on harder difficulties. Now I know what you're saying, but Calypso, why didn't you just play on normal mode? Because I like a challenge, damn it. And it shouldn't even come down to that. Normal is the standard difficulty that most people will play on. Normal difficulty is still a bit of a challenge, and enemies are still spongy, and guns are still kind of useless. Sure, when you upgrade them on normal mode, they do a lot more damage, and it almost makes them viable. Upgrading them is still ridiculous, and it takes a bunch of playthroughs. Just see Mandalore's video on that one. But all in all, combat falls apart almost immediately after the first few levels. Now don't get me wrong, this is a melee combat focused game, so guns are meant to be like a second option, alright? But on harder difficulties, it just makes them pointless. Like, why even bother if every enemy is going to just be a giant sponge and you're always forced and defaulting back to the melee combat? And especially even when you upgrade your weapon, enemies still are so long to die. Like, the damage barrier is ridiculous. It turns what starts out legitimately as a fun game into something frustrating. Boss fights are non-existent in that there's only one 4 times in a row, plus the end boss. And on harder levels, with a melee focused combat game and resources being so limited and guns being kind of sucky, yeah, I'm sure you guys can see where this is going. The story, on the other hand, is kind of a mess as well. I want to start off with the positives in that everyone here does a very good job with what they are given. Jacob, the main character you play as, is relatable in that he's just a guy doing a job that goes wrong and he's wound up in a situation that he doesn't want to be in. You feel for him. You feel kind of connected because that is you. That would be you in this situation. Karen Fukuhara of The Boys is simply fantastic. Enough said. And of course, the legendary Sam Witwer.
Okay, all right. In my mind's eye, Kenobi. Kenobi!
Great actor. He chews up scenery like nobody's business. He gets like 10 minutes of screen time, and boy does he make it work. He's probably the best part of this entire thing, and it's a shame that he only shows up for about 10 minutes. It's a total waste of an actor and a total waste of what could have been a very good story. I'm not going to go super into story details here because for that, I highly recommend, again, watching Mandalore's review for it, especially for the story if you do want spoilers and everything else. I'm also going to shout out the YouTube channel Kevin Help Us and I Can Fix the Callisto Protocol's story video. That does a fantastic job of breaking down the story how to fix it, especially, and what could be done next, as well as the weird PUBG tie-in stuff. So Callisto Protocol started off legitimately, kid you not, as a PUBG tie-in. They even tweeted about it. A couple months later, they redacted that tweet, and it's no longer part of the PUBG universe. But suffice it to say, everything that was going to be PUBG related within the Callisto Protocol is still in there, and you can't erase it. They couldn't erase it. So it's technically a PUBG game, but it's just a sci-fi PUBG game. It's a lot. It's a lot. So yeah, I highly recommend watching Mandalore's video on the story, and I Can Fix the Callisto Protocol story by Kevin Help Us. Links for those will be down below here. And I'm sure you can just Google Callisto Protocol story fix or something, or YouTube it rather, and it will be on there as well. But to end my opinion on the story, I enjoyed most of it. There were some really cool fourth wall breaking, like whoa moments within the game. And of course, every actor does a great job, even though it's kind of a generic sci-fi story and is sort of a recycled Dead Space. That's all I'll say. Like, it's executed well, it's done well, it's okay, could be better. And it's a shame. It's a shame really that the Callisto Protocol is kind of bad, because it's also kind of good. It's a weird one. It's a weird one just because some of these elements are half-baked and they didn't go all the way with one choice or another. I understand you didn't want to do the dismemberment thing. Okay, I get it. But you could for types of enemies. At least have them turn into a noodle monster and shoot off the tentacles and then die. Just don't use the gimmick as a mechanic to stop them from transforming into a Hulk to resume the melee combat. You have guns, make use of them, and on harder difficulties, make the upgrades actually work. Like, there's a lot of strange design choices here, but that's the risk of new IPs. I did have fun though, however, in the end, and despite this game being not very scary in some parts, mostly all of it, except for me getting scared because I'm a little wuss, I still got scared. I do recommend this one. I do recommend playing the Callisto Protocol when it's on sale. When it's on a steep sale. Like, give it another 2 years and it'll be $5. With all of that said, I've been Callisto. Wait, what? With all that said, I've been Calypso, and I'll see you guys in the next one.